What is the best part about going to the library?
I feel like the library to me was always my favorite thing to do with my Nana because every single time she would always take us to McDonald's and then we'd go to the library. So it's one of those places that's so magical and so dear to my heart because of those childhood memories with her.
There's peace and quiet there. The one in Glenborough, they have a fun kids area and there's arts and crafts, which I love.
I really like getting books. I like how all the librarians are really nice. I like reading and just the calming environment there.
I can look around and look at all the covers of books. It's so cool to know that people are actually coming up with these stories and they're writing it all out just from their imagination. I think it's so cool.
What's your favorite kind of book?
I like books that make me think in a sad way, where you're rooting on the main character to overcome challenges.
My favorite book, I Survive or Dogman. Or Little Sister, Baby Sister Club.
Right now I'm reading one about this vet who treats a bunch of magical animals, and then this kid figures out about it, and then she kind of is forced to hire him because he figured it out.
I would say realistic fiction. Yeah.
What do you think about librarians?
They're cool.
They're all just really nice and willing to help and ready to help and knowledgeable.
I actually have volunteered at the library, so I'm pretty close with all the librarians. I usually see Cassie, I see her a lot, and then I also see Bailey a lot. Cassie's been my director for shows I've been in, so I have a good bond with her, and she's so smart. You can go to her for anything. And then Bailey, you can always go and ask her something if you don't know, and she'll be happy to help.
Hey ambassadors, I'm Messellech Abebe, many call me Selley. Today, we are talking about something that brings back a lot of memories for me and maybe for you too, public libraries. But not just books and story time. We're diving into the deeper stuff today around joy, literacy, anxiety, advocacy, and why a library card might just be a superpower. Our guest today is Mychal Threets, former librarian, current PBS Resident Librarian. Don't worry, we'll get into what that means in a little bit. And full-time champion for library kids everywhere. You'll hear Mychal explain why he believes every child deserves access to books, what it means when libraries are defunded, and how joy shows up, even on the hardest days. This conversation gave me goosebumps, and it reminded me of the first time I took my own kids to the library. Growing up in an immigrant household, there were lots of rules and boundaries, but the library was one of the few places my parents were always okay with me going to, especially by myself. And for me, as a kid, it was a place that I could go and meet up with friends and just be free. My parents viewed it as a safe space, and to a degree, so did I. I know that for many people listening, you may have not set foot in a library since college. I know there was a huge gap since the last time I went, and I just recently went back with my children, who were young, to get their first library card. And so talking to Mychal today was a real treat because he reminded me, and hopefully it will remind all of us, what it was like to go to the library as a kid, and what it's like for kids today to go to the library. And without further ado, Mychal Threets. Mychal, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, I think let's just kick things off with, can you explain to our audience what library joy means to you?
Library joy changes every single day for me. For today, I think a lot of it is that the library is happiness on your best day, on your worst day, on your medium-sized day, always there for you. I think I first started talking about joy and libraries together because I believe that joy is something that we can always seize, but it's also something that we're not always ready for. And that's quite okay because whenever you're ready, if it's a Tuesday, if it's a Saturday, joy is there for you to seize. And I feel the same way about the library. Everyone's not always ready to be a library kid, to be a library grown-up. People think I'm not a book reader, the library's not for me. And they're very wrong. The library's always for you. There's always something there for you. But whenever you need the library, it's there for you to seize. Libraries are even available now 24/7 because of digital libraries. And I think that's what library joy is for me. It's a library always being there for you whenever you need it.
I love that. And I have to say, I love your perspective on joy. It often boils down to your perspective. So I really, really appreciate that about you. I have young children, and over the years, one of my favorite trips to chaperone for them has always been their trip to the library. Typically, it takes place in kindergarten. So I've been on 2 trips so far. And I love to see these little kids getting so excited to take out books, to listen to story time. And I have to say, when I've been to the library recently, I'm dating myself a little bit, but it looks very different than when I was growing up. They have virtual and augmented reality experiences in some libraries, podcast studios. It feels like the libraries have evolved significantly. And so, for you, I just wanted to ask, can you share with our listeners how you've seen libraries adapt to meet really the rapid shifting interests of kids and technology nowadays? And how, in your experience, have libraries continued to keep these elements of wonder and marvel and joy for kids?
Yeah, it's so very interesting. I think it's very funny what you said about how the library has changed so much. And I think I would argue that the library probably doesn't change in the way that it looks in its appearance, because most libraries don't have the budget to be able to change the way the library looks. They don't even have enough money in the funds for painting the library or things of that nature. So if you love the library since you were a library kid and you visit your local library today, it probably looks the same, but for this conversation, it has changed drastically in what it offers. So many people will come up to me, not so much anymore, but a lot of times they'll still say, libraries are still a thing, they're still relevant. And it's like they're absolutely still relevant because they are changing. Now there's more and more audiobooks. Libby is one of my favorite things to talk about, even though there's things like Cloud Library and Hoopla Digital. Libby is very big on accessibility. They have just something called a dyslexic font. So if you're reading ebooks through Libby, you can change the font, make it easier to read if you have dyslexia. There's a way to change the audio speed if you're listening to an audiobook. Some people listen at 2x speed, 3x speed, 4x speed. I don't personally understand how they do it. I'm a 1.5 listener max, but there are superheroes who listen to it at 3x speed. And that's just one thing that's changed. But there's so many more digital services. There's so many ways for you to access the library at home. But as you were mentioning, there's now maker spaces. So there's 3D printers at the library. You can 3D print a keychain. You can 3D print so many different things. I've seen an unhoused person 3D print shoelaces because they didn't have shoelaces and they wanted an easier way to keep their shoes tied at all times. There's musical instruments at the library. There's video game collections at the library. There's board game collections at the library. There's new movies, there's new TV shows. You can watch the first season of Severance. You can watch seasons of Abebe Elementary at your local library. And this is all just to stay relevant with the times, to show people that there's something for everybody. Library is always going to be the house of books, but there's so much more at the local library. And I think this is also such a very interesting conversation, because libraries have had to adapt to the present times with the change of adults and grown-ups, not so much kids. I believe that kids are always going to be able to be hooked at the library from preschool all the way to 7th, 8th grade. It just ingrained in them to seek curiosity, to discover their imagination. And that's what the library represents in all those worlds. So kids always love stories. They love asking questions. They love learning new things. They love being their zany, unhinged selves. And that's what the library does for them. But as they get older, as they think that the library, that books become uncool, they have to figure out ways that they can go back to their local library, which is why it's important that people like Steph Curry, like Malala, like LeBron James, Taylor Swift, and Chappell Roan are supporting libraries. People like Jennifer Garner and so many other people who are big library fans, and showing people that, hey, the library's always been cool, but now we're openly talking about it.
And you know what, Mychal, I think what I heard you say is the library will always be inclusive, no matter what your interests are, no matter what your developmental needs are, no matter what your actual real needs are, whether it be shoelaces, the library is for everyone. And I love that. And I should actually go back and clarify, the library did very much look and smell and kind of feel like worn in a little bit, like a warm blanket.
The nostalgic smell, like this classic book fair catalog.
Exactly. But you hit it on the head. That's how the public local libraries have kept their element of joy and their elements of curiosity and interest for kids at every stage, be it, young adults all the way to adults as well. So you've recently transitioned from working at a library to being an advocate and PBS's resident librarian. Can you explain what that position entails?
I honestly can't. We're still figuring it out. As far as I know, I am the first PBS resident librarian that there has ever been. A lot of it is thanks to social media and people who love the library and love that I talked about the library. They would constantly tag PBS and PBS Kids in my videos. They would tag me in PBS and PBS Kid videos. And both of us had no idea what to do with the other. We both were fascinated by the calls of support, but we just didn't know how to help one another. And then they reached out to me and I said, I love PBS and PBS Kids. I was raised on PBS Kids. What we've done currently is a social media series. So I share book recommendations, I share library stories, and I send them to PBS Kids' social media team, and then they post the videos to their platforms, and they tag me, and I get to see myself with the PBS and PBS Kids name. And it's just so very cool for a PBS person like myself. But this year, we're hoping to make it a little bit different, where it's something that's more specific to the collaboration and not just a continuation of what I do. But essentially, the whole goal of the PBS Resident Librarian is for a librarian with degrees like myself to support books and the mission of PBS and PBS Kids, that public broadcast television is there so that everyone can enjoy and learn from and just have more joyful parts of their day.
Well, I can't wait to see how this collaboration evolves because it's already pretty amazing.
It's so much fun. I got to talk with my good friend Arthur Reed, the aardvark. I have Arthur's library card tattooed on me, and just got to do so many amazing things. But the best of it all is just to amplify and support librarians, library workers, and educators and kids, and show them what they can be.
I love that. And such an example of when you follow your passion, I bet you don't even feel like you're working some days.
I mean, it is a job, but not really. It's definitely more of a partnership between me and PBS Kids. I'm no longer a traditional librarian for mental health reasons, and I thought I was just going to have to be floundering, trying to discover things. All of these things have happened much to my surprise. None of this was in the works when I left the library. I left the library solely thinking I had nothing to fall back on, and I'm just so grateful and blessed and honestly shocked. I don't even think I ever dreamed that anything that I've gotten to do would happen for my life. As much as I love it, I often tell people that if I knew all this was going to happen, I don't know if I would have honestly started talking about libraries on social media, but people always ask, what would Library Kid you think? And I believe Library Kid me would be appalled at all of the things that I've done just because of anxiety and so much more. And just like, what are you doing? We said we'll never do that. We can't handle that.
Well, when presented the opportunity, you kind of push through it. And again, you're an example in that way. So I love that. You were also recently named Time's Next Generation of Leaders. And in your remarks, you noted that a real threat to libraries today is funding. And I don't know how familiar you are with First Focus, but as an organization, we really work to prioritize and center children in federal policies and budget decisions. And so, we always say money matters, no matter what you're looking at, children's health, education, in this case, libraries. And to offer context, libraries are funded by local, state, and federal governments in addition to, typically, in some cases, they may do fundraising efforts and those fees and fines. I don't know how that works now. But we know that political priorities at the state and local level will drive, a lot of these decisions. Funding from libraries primarily comes from the local government level at around 60-75% on average. And as someone that is passionate about community engagement and advocacy, what is your advice for library kids and library grown-ups who want to see funding increase at their local libraries?
First, I'm so very thankful to Time Magazine to have chosen me as one of their next generation leaders, upon actual next generation leaders like Ray and Simone Manuel and so many others. It's just such a cool honor, not for myself, but more so for the people you just spoke about, the library kids, the library grown-ups. It shows them that the library is their future and that the library is a place where they can become whomever they want to be, the best version of themselves. And I think to answer your question about the advice I have for library people who want to see funding increased, is to talk about the library like we're doing right now. That's the best way to show decision makers how important the library is, that we're making it a part of every single conversation. We're making literacy a focal point of what we want for our community, what we want for our children, and what we want to see in the future of education. We want them to have stories where they can see themselves in the pages, in the chapters. We want them to be encouraged to tell their own story. We want them to write that story so that others can also follow in their footsteps and read that very stories. We all have such fond memories of story time, of the summer reading program, of visiting the library with our grown-ups, and just being there, just picking out some of our very first books, befriending the local librarian, some of us paying fees and fines like you had mentioned, and just what comes with that. But I think just talking positively about the library is where people from all walks of life get together. And I think that's the way that we have to do it in order to increase funding. We have to give them no choice but to see not just the importance of the library, but how much we love the library, because there are so many things that are important to the community that we don't necessarily love. We may respect it, but it's not an actual love. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who actually dislikes the library and can actually say that out loud, that I don't like the library. I think like that's what you have to do, is you just have to say, do you or do you not? And when they say yes, it's like, oh, well then help us fund the library. And then that's when you get into people getting library cards, telling their friends and family to get library cards, going to all the various programs, suggesting new things for the library, and just writing letters, posting about how much you love the library. And again, just word of mouth, just showing everybody the library, the library, the library. I think the more we talk about it, the more the people who are making decisions will be like, you know what, we listened. This is what we can do. So it helps everybody to fund the library. But I think that's what it takes in order for us to get the proper funding that libraries and library workers deserve.
One of my favorite child advocacy slogans, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better word, is who's for kids and who's just kidding. And I just feel like that's a real question. You also talk a lot about literacy. You've stated that everyone deserves access to books. We should all be celebrating the freedom to read, not banning books and removing access to books. You touched on it a little bit, but what do you think is at heart of this fear, of books being banned?
I honestly have no idea what the fear is. I don't even ever get to talk with people who actually talk about why they're so afraid, why they want to have books removed. But I think if I had to narrow it down from just like the reading that I've done, the research that I've done, I think it's just a fear of, they think that books have an agenda. They think that books are trying to tell their kids to hate themselves, to hate their past, especially for families with kids who are white. And I've never experienced that in talking at schools and talking at libraries. It's far from the truth. I think they actually have far more empathy when they see books with kids of color, kids from various backgrounds, characters of people who are disabled, characters who are unhoused. They see these people all around them, and then they see them in books, and they're like, they're just people just like me. Now I can learn about them too. And so often I would read picture books during story time, and I would be afraid of certain elements of how the kids would react. If it's like a monster in the picture book going to eat the old lady, I'm like, oh, how are the kids going to react? And I read that part in story time, and the kids are just like, keep on reading. What's the rest of the story? Why are you pausing? Isn't this just part of the story? Because they know that it's a book. They know that something is going to happen, and they're just ready for more. They have questions. They're such deep thinkers. They look in the world in such a beautiful way. They don't have a filter, so they don't get embarrassed as easily quite yet. They're willing to just say things. And I think that's what we need to focus on instead of banning the books, is knowing that, yes, they have these questions. They want stories of their peers. They want characters who are Black, characters who are Asian, characters who are LGBTQIA+. They want to see unhoused characters. They want to see characters in wheelchairs because they want to learn about their potential friends, classmates, family members, neighbors. But when you ban books, you take away those opportunities. If they have questions, you can address it. All of us who are saying we have the freedom to read, we want access to books, we're not saying that you, the grown-up, and your kids can't have a conversation and say that your kid can't read this book. That's totally fine. You're the grown-up, you're trying to figure out where your kid's at. It's okay if your kid may not be ready for those books, because another kid may absolutely be ready to read that book, and that's also absolutely okay. And I think lastly, I think it's so important to talk about access to books and to stop banning books, is because for so long on the topic of literacy, there's so many of us who didn't have a chance to be literate. Almost every talk I do lately at library conferences, educator conferences, I mention my grandparents who were not allowed to have library cards as kids. They weren't allowed to visit libraries. They've since passed away, but they were so proud that myself became a librarian when they didn't have, my grandfather didn't have an education past 9th grade. I got a bachelor's degree, I got a master's degree, and now I go around bothering people about libraries and literacy when previously it wasn't part of their lives, and not part of their lives, it was forbidden from doing so. And I think that's why it's so important to talk about literacy, is because we do all have a chance to be literate. And that's such a beautiful thing, because so many people struggle with literacy or didn't have access to it. So I believe that we each have to do everything in our power to pursue literacy at all costs.
I love that last perspective that you offered as it relates to your grandparents. That was beautiful. Let's put a pin right there. And when we come back, we gotta dive into the book bans. I think that's a conversation I'd love your perspective on. Coming Coming up, what kids really think about book bans, how libraries differ across the country, and what it looks like when you treat children like whole people, anxiety and all. Stay with us. We've been talking to Mychal Threets about libraries, joy, and who decides what stories kids get to see. Here's where I jump in with something that hit me as a mom. What I've found is development and learning never really ends. And I think it actually gets a little tricky and complicated when you become a parent. And oftentimes, in my limited experience, it's me that needs to be ready for that developmental leap and not necessarily my kids. And I think that holds true to the conversation around the book banning fears. And it's really an adult level conversation, right? Where I think, it is overwhelming to think about the responses because kids are naturally curious. And once you pique that curiosity, it's hard to kind of turn the light off or unlearn what you just learned or, what you might be interested in. And I think that may be a good opportunity of something to explore on this show, but then just, more broadly in the national discourse, because I think that ultimately is understandably in some situations, difficult. And oftentimes parents of color have to have very difficult conversations with kids, regardless of their developmental level, because of just the realities of the nature of the world we live in today. So, it's hard all around.
It's very hard. I think we often forget that kids have opinions about banned books because honestly, I learned lately in conversations with 5th graders and 4th graders and 7th graders that they don't often know that books are being banned because the grown-ups, the teachers aren't able to talk with them about it. They're not able to give reasons, and oftentimes they just remove the book without telling the kids. So these school libraries are getting smaller and smaller. And some of these kids, they read what's going on in the world and they're like, what is happening? Why are you banning our stories? And these are 5th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders who want to have a voice, who want to say, give us our stories. We just want to read. In this conversation about banned books is these people who are saying, let's ban the book, which is honestly a very small percentage of people. They're just very loud about wanting to do so. Is I believe they should start having to go to these schools and tell the kids, this is why I want the book banned. They should have to answer questions from the kids because they're going to have questions. And if you're so adamant about wanting a book banned, you should be able to tell those kids exactly why. When they're befuddled, when they're still perplexed, I would hope that they would realize that perhaps they were incorrect and maybe the book should just be banned for them, which is okay. Every book is not for everyone, but every book is for someone.
One thing kids are going to have is questions. A lot of them.
Questions or statements. If you give them a chance to raise their hand, they're gonna say something.
Have you noticed differences between libraries located in urban settings, suburban settings, rural settings, and communities, now even airports?
I have noticed several differences. I mean, a library is a library wherever you go, no matter what the thinking is in each different state. I've been to, I think, to nearly every single state in the United States in the past couple of years, and each state thinks a little bit differently. But the library people are always like, we love the library. We want to love books. Dogman is beloved everywhere I go. Good chunk of people still know about Lewis Acker's Wayside School and Holes with Stan the Yale Nats. Beverly Cleary remains the queen of children's literature. Everyone knows Junie B. Jones. Amelia Bedelia, people are very, it's kind of controversial. Some people love Amelia. Some people are like, Amelia's a bit too much for me. Those are all the same, but I think the thing that does change that would surprise people is because of funding, just a various lack of access to libraries in many different states, in many communities. Not so much if it's suburban, if it's a certain type of neighborhood, but more so just the state. I've been surprised myself to learn that states like Arizona has almost no school libraries whatsoever. In a state like New York, which is kind of like the mecca of libraries with the New York Public Library, they do have school libraries, but they don't have a lot of designated school librarians or school library workers. If they do, oftentimes it'll be a teacher who has since filled the role at the school library, which is not the worst thing in the world. I think I'm probably in the minority who says at least there's someone specifically assigned to the school library. But I love the show Abebe Elementary. I love that one of the characters talked about every library should have a librarian. Talking about every school library should have a librarian, and it's so very true. So while I'm appreciative of teachers filling in for the role, library work is very specific. There's a reason that we need a master's degree, so that there should be school librarians or at least a school library media tech in each of the school libraries. And I think that's what I've been shocked to discover differs when you travel at different libraries around the United States is that there are different access to these books for these students. Public libraries are largely the same. I think some of them have more of the special collections. Some libraries have more video games, more musical instruments. They may have 2 or 3 3D printers as opposed to one. I've noticed more often the lack of staffing, the lack of librarians in visiting different types of libraries.
That's very interesting, especially about Arizona.
Yes. I don't even think it's necessarily overall budgeting, funding all the time that leads to that. It's more so of actual support of a library as the decision makers thinking, is the library important? Schools are so concerned about testing, and in order for a kid to be a test taker, they have to be able to read that test book. So everything that you want them to do in schools, even if you think a library is not important, reading and literacy is important, which is part of that library. So in order for your student to be the best possible student, they need the library. They need to be reading at school because they're doing it already. It just may not be the chapter book that you think that they're reading in the school library. It may not be evident in Dogman, in Dork Diaries, in Jerry Craft graphic novels, but it's still very, very important. Once they read for joy, that's when they're being able to just read everything and flourish in the way that you want them to and expect them to with the various expectations that come from school.
Again, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Through social media, you've opened up quite a bit around your mental health and how you process anxiety. It has been so helpful for, I think, children, hands down, but also for adults, that the way that you paint pictures with your words is so clear. And I think sometimes when even adults are feeling feelings, you don't even know how to quite connect them to identify and then act accordingly. I just love the way that you're so vocal around the issue. And now kids have had to deal with so much, with a growing social media environment, constant changes in technology. We're still kind of in this weird post-COVID, what are we, type of society. I mean, everything in the lives of children just have shifted drastically, I think, in the last decade. What have you noticed in your conversations with kids?
I think I've noticed a lot of what I dealt with as a library kid is that they're suffering just as much as adults are. I think, and I've talked about it a lot, is that adults often think, I don't think we think it, but we subconsciously believe that mental health is an adult problem. Like almost like once you turn 18, then you can have anxiety, then you can suffer from panic attacks, then depression becomes a real thing. But in talking with kids, it's very evident that they deal with just as much, if not more, anxiety than we do. And oftentimes, I think what they're feeling in that context is a lot of what myself, yourself, and so many listeners have experienced, is that we're talking about this in 2025. For the last several decades, mental health has been very stigmatized, where we don't talk about it. We don't have a chance to embrace our feelings, to talk about our emotions, to honestly to have a chance to get better, to give our brain a rest so that we can get to a day where maybe we don't have as much anxiety or panic. And I think that talking with kids, they're like, yeah, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, maybe I'm having a panic attack. I've been with kids in the library where they're having a panic attack for the very first time, and their grown-ups don't know what's happening because they've never talked about it openly. Panic attacks present in very different ways. Sometimes their grown-ups are rightfully very worried that they think their kid is having a heart attack. So you have to go through those things with them. And I'm like, I'm not a medical professional, and I hate to say those things or preface things by saying I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist. When I've lived through all those different things, I'm able to use shared experience to say, this is what might be going on. And oftentimes I found that with kids in mental health, you just have to talk with them like they're an adult. You may say some things that are bigger, and they'll just, like you said, they always have questions. And depending on the age, just as low as kindergarten, you can talk about your stomach hurting. You can be like, I have a headache in my stomach. For me, I usually will show them my tattoos and be like, oh, pins and needles in my tattoos. I feel like my tattoos are moving when I have anxiety. It's hard to breathe. And those are all things that they understand because it's oftentimes what's happening to them in the throes of their mental health. You just have to talk with kids openly about anxiety, and it doesn't have to be heavy. It's just a mention of the words anxiety. It's talking about mental health in ways that show that there are still joys of having a good day. That's mental health too. Mental health is a positive thing. There's mental health and there's mental health struggles. We can talk about mental health and say self-care is important. To drink water, to go for walks, to pet your dogs, to pet your cats, to go on little trips with your family. Watching basketball, playing basketball, all these things is different for every single person. But most of all, I've learned that we have to talk about it. so that they're prepared for what might happen, for what they might be experiencing. I had a kid at a school library not too long ago ask me, what do I do for my anxiety? And I talked about putting my hands in my pockets, going for silly walks for my silly mental health, doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, looking for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, that sort of thing. And just saying, yeah, this is what I do. And then asking that question back to them, what do you do? And they're just like, oh, I do this, I do that. I pet my cat. I talk to my little brother, all those different things that they do. But I think the most important thing I've learned is to have the conversation with them, because it's important to make sure that they know that what's going on is very real and that their emotions and feelings are entirely valid.
Absolutely. I love how you say library kids are going to save the world, because I think that's very true. We know that libraries are a critical piece to support children and families. And again, at First Focus, we work on all issues impacting kids because we recognize that they all matter, right? If kids are hungry, if they're worried about ICE coming to get them from school or a local library, these are all things that dictate and shape their lives and their education and their outcomes ultimately. And we know that they need so much more. In your opinion, especially now that you've shifted into this role of advocacy, are there policies that you feel like would benefit children as a whole?
No specific policies. I think any policy that focuses on library, focuses on education, focuses on ensuring that kids have access to food, access to water, basically any policy that makes sure that our kids have the chance to flourish and to thrive is a policy that I support. I think will set them up to be able to save the world. Library kids will save the world. I think I said that, and I thought maybe it's too much pressure, but library kids have since assured me that it's not too much pressure because they're adamant that they're going to save the world. They grew up with the Incredible Hulk. They grow up with Spider-Man. They grow up with Batman, with Miles Morales, which whoever their version of a superhero is, and they're like, that's who I'm going to be. It's capable. It's possible for me. So we just need to introduce policies that convince them to keep on thinking that way, to keep on growing, to make sure that they have a chance to go to school, to afford school, that the stressors of education isn't too much for them. And if it is, then maybe we need policies to revamp those expectations and say, this is the way that we have to get them going forward. And that's why I love being homeschooled. It was a chance for me to know that I learn differently than most kids. I'm not a dumb person. I'm an educated person, but I never did well in structured school. Taking tests was very anxiety inducing for me, but online school was where it was at for me. My mom made sure that when we took tests, if we got a D or an F, then she was like, now I know what you don't know. We're going to go back and we're going to learn those things and we're going to retake the tests. And that's what schools should be doing. That's what policies should be doing. It should be setting us up for success, setting kids up for success so that if they don't know something, they can learn it and they can pass, because that's the goal of education, not to fail them, but to teach them, to encourage them, to lead them forward. And that's what I'm hoping for. I think even a policy like saying, you know what, we don't need perfect attendance awards anymore. Perfect attendance is not something that makes your student a better person. So many people are not capable of going to school. You mentioned ICE. Some people do not go to school because they're afraid of what's going to happen, but they are still just as smart as a kid who's able to go to school every single day. They have a chance to get straight A's just like all those different kids. So I think we just need policies that empower kids and get them moving forwards. Policies selfishly that make sure libraries are funded. Policies that ensure teachers are paid what they're worth, which is far more than they're making right now. Policies just to give the people who I love, our Mr. Rogers helpers, policies to make sure that they have every tool at their disposal to create the best possible future for the kids.
I love that. So we ask every guest of ours this question, and I feel like you're going to have some good ones. The nature of all of our work is so hard in different ways. And, we lean on our guests for a solid playlist to turn to some songs or albums when it just feels like a lot, but we need to keep going. What is your recommendation, Mychal?
Every single playlist I have is all over the place. I'm sure that Defying Gravity is going to be on my Spotify Wrapped. I love any chance to listen to Cynthia Erivo sing the word unlimited. It's just very empowering. I'm a huge fan of Selena Quintanilla Perez. I love Bitty Bitty Bomb Bomb. It's a great song to get you going, to give you hope, to make you move. Even if you're like me and you have no rhythm, you can still you can still give it your best. I'm from the Bay Area, so I always enjoy listening to Mac Dre and E40. It may not be able to empower library kids as much. Library grown-ups may not like it too much, but it's still there for you. I'm all aboard the Kendrick Lamar hype train. Love going to libraries and hearing library kids yell out mustard, and the library grown-ups are like, "Stop that! This is a library. Just whisper it." So I love that takeover. Hot to Go by Chapel Roan is so much fun. Reading Rainbow is one of my all-time favorite shows. LeVar Burton is my hero. I think listening to the Reading Rainbow theme song will always get you going. On the topic of theme songs, I think just the Golden Girls, Thank You for Being a Friend. It's just such a reminder to us.
Oh
all.
my gosh, I love that. I actually was at a Galentine's Day trip with maybe like 16 other friends, and everyone had a signature drink to make with a partner. And I was closing it out with one of my girlfriends, and that was our theme song. So we were playing the Golden Girls theme song as we served our adult beverages. It's a classic.
That's amazing. I also love that you can go on a trip with 16 friends. That's a good, healthy amount of friends. I can't say I could think of 16 people that I could go on a trip with that aren't my family. So good for you. That's good. That's good for your mental health. That's good for your place in life. That's really cool.
It is. I'm grateful. Mychal, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. No, this has been such a great conversation. I appreciate it. I appreciate your focus on children, your support of libraries, all the good things in the world, giving kids the best possible chance for education and literacy.
Mychal, I could have talked to him for hours. He was so sweet. What I love the most is that he reminds us that every kid, no matter their background, zip code, or reading level, deserves access to stories that reflect their full humanity. And that talking about joy, anxiety, and possibility in the same breath, that was the good stuff. Speaking of Kids is a podcast by First Focus on Children. Produced by Windhaven Productions and Blue Jay Atlantic. Elizabeth Wyndham is the supervising producer, Julia Wyndham is the editor, and Jay Woodward is the senior producer. For more information about this episode, visit